back there.
That's what I thought too.
That's why we opened it before you start, because it's a little noisy.
Yeah, the second I pulled out I thought he was drinking Red Bull. I was like, whoa, it's ramping it up.
Moving. Which is good, and she'll do it, some writing about it.
And your mic is live.
Everybody's mic is
Yeah, great to see you too. I was just saying, Mike, it's awesome that you got to come out.
You did tell me that. Excellent. Thanks for saying hi.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi. See, how are things going? I know you're the guy taking all the pictures.
I have 3 uniforms so I do this today. Friday I do a change of command, just as a attendee at Penelon. That's in camis, and then on Saturday I'm going to the ESB6 commissioning, and I'm in dress blues. So I had 2 suitcases because I had so many fun.
I had to take our end of the use. So I had to take the 12 helmets.
I ended up wearing my cami boots on the plane. I felt like such a tool, but I was like, that's the only way it's all going to fit. Luckily, they've given us more comfortable boots these days.
Yeah.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start the panel discussion on resources in just a few minutes. I'd like to ask you to silence or turn off your electronic devices. As a reminder, audience members will be invited to ask questions, and so please come to the standing mics on the floor to ask your question at the appropriate time. And at the conclusion of the discussion, please go into the West app and find this panel conversation and provide feedback afterwards. Thank you.
Are you going to use that glass?
No, sir, it's yours.
Please. I guess this is so we don't drink microplastic. Is that the deal? Or just generate plastic?
I think it's just like more recyclable. The hotel, that's the water. The water in the hotel was, the Hilton.
Anne Arundel County is you can't get anything in styrofoam. In Annapolis, bags are out. They've been out. Paper bags and paper. No more styrofoam. Plastic's next. They have a plan. It's you just adapt.
Right. I keep a whole bunch of those, grocery bags in the back of my car, so I use them, so I don't have to pay the nickel or whatever it is.
I'm old enough now. I got enough canvas bags to take
Right.
with me.
Exactly.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Day 3 of West. I'm Bill Hamblett, the Editor-in-Chief of Proceedings at the U.S. Naval Institute. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel session, Do the Sea Services Have the Resources Needed to fulfill the national security strategy. And I want to thank Lockheed Martin for sponsoring this morning's panel session. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the panel, Admiral Jonathan Greenert, U.S. Navy retired. Admiral Greenert is a 1975 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He completed nuclear power school and served as a submarine officer. He commanded USS Honolulu, SSN 718, Submarine Squadron 11, U.S. Naval Forces Marianas, U.S. 7th Fleet, U.S. Fleet Forces Command, and finally served as the 30th Chief of Naval Operations from 2011 to 2015, and he is a director on the Naval Institute Board of Directors. We thank him for his service there. Admiral Greenert, panel's yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. First of all, can you all hear me all right out there? Great, excellent. So we're going to do this just a little bit different than the plenary session from the perspective of asking questions. What we're going to do is I have just a small opening. I'm going to ask the folks to do a preamble of a few minutes, and then I'm going to ask a moderated question. When I get through the first question for each of them, anytime after that, come on up to the microphone. I have other questions. A retired flag officer, we can talk forever. But what we'd like to do is make sure we get to your question. So as soon as you have a question, go to the mic, we'll break, go to your question, because it's most important for all of us, and we talked about this, me alone up here, that we get to your questions and talk about the things you want to talk about. So that's going to be the process. What I'd like to do now is a little bit of my opinion. So the question that was up there is, do the sea services have enough resources to meet the strategy? And the answer to that is, I'm tempted to say, hell no. And we never have, but let me just say maybe. And I say that because for those of you that have served, or if you think about those two processes, how we build a defense strategy from the national security strategy and how our budget process, they're two sort of independent processes. Two different secretariats run them in the Department of Defense. They run separately, if you will, in a calendar, and they have various points where they stop and come together. They do actually do that. At the end, near the end of a POM cycle every year, the Department of Defense sits down and they review all the service program objective memoranda, look at the budget, and they say, well, let's see, and one of the questions is it in line with the strategy? So that conversation does take place. It tends to be episodically, has been my observation anyway. So, and they review that part of it. So, to my knowledge, I don't know that there ever has been before we determine the strategy, let's see if it's fully resourced. There are checks done on that from time to time. So the fact of the matter is these folks are going to talk about it from their perspective and how they see it, but I'll leave it with, I guess we'll see. So the first thing we want to do to get started is do, if you will, the preamble. I'm going to ask each of our panelists, Admiral Matt Lake first, and then Admiral Brad Skillman, and then General Rainman Adams, to each talk about what's important to them for a period of time, get the introduction done, and then we'll roll into some questions and answers. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind kicking it off, thank you.
Yes, sir, thanks. So the Coast Guard, obviously a little bit smaller than the other services here. Our budget's about $13.7 billion a year, so relatively small, and we're part of the Department of Homeland Security. But to answer the question of, do you have enough resources to fulfill the national security strategy, I agree with you, sir. We generally don't. But we certainly align the resources that we do have to meet the nation's most pressing needs. And I would argue you can't really buy your way out of the problem. This is about making do with the resources you have to make the best decisions in terms of return on investment for the nation. So the Coast Guard's had quite a bit of an increased demand signal over the last decade or so due to geopolitics and many other things. There's been a lot of effort. The Coast Guard's focused on interdicting drugs in the Western Hemisphere transit zone with the intent on stabilizing some of the countries there. If you look at migration and how that and why that occurs, within the Western Hemisphere. A lot of that is due to destabilization in many of the countries south of our border. That's both economic drivers and political drivers. So one of the things the Coast Guard does is attempts to disrupt those transnational criminal organizations that are making that more difficult. Maritime migration has been a big challenge for us with destabilization in Haiti and Cuba, and we've had to surge a number of resources to address that. Protecting the maritime transportation system is also a challenge for us given the growing complexities, the volume of maritime transit. $5.4 trillion worth of maritime commerce goes through our waterways every year. Things like offshore wind, use of, believe it or not, nuclear power on commercial vessels. These are new things that are coming online that we have to maintain safety and security. And then there's also increased frequency of natural disasters. You only have to look and turn on the news and figure out what bad things are happening in the coastal areas of the United States, including right near here, to see how that hits home. Last year, the Coast Guard saved more than 15,000 lives responding to natural disasters and related maritime activity. So there's also increased demand for Coast Guard forces in the Indo-Pacific to counter some of the threats of our competitors there and to help stabilize and build partnerships and help some of our allied countries develop their own forces so that they can safeguard their own waters. So so what are the Coast Guard's investment priorities, and how do we accomplish or address those threats? One, the big one, is recapitalization of our fleet. So most of our offshore fleet, a large part of it, was built in the 1960s and 70s. So we've begun an effort to recapitalize that fleet that hopefully will be mostly complete in the next 10 to 15 years. Workforce, our recruiting is a huge challenge for us, like the other services, so we've had to invest a bunch of money into building our workforce. And then finally, aging infrastructure, which has taken a back seat to some of our surface and aircraft investment. We're now having to invest there. There are certainly challenges, and I'm sure we'll hear about it. Continuing resolutions, that has a big impact on the Coast Guard, both short-term CRs, and then in the event of a full-year continuing resolution, the Coast Guard is held to a different set of caps because most of our funding comes in non-defense, which means we'll see some pretty substantial reductions in our operations funding as well as our recapitalization. And then finally, because of the failure to pass the emergency border supplemental, that also has an impact on the Coast Guard because we're within Department of Homeland Security. There's now a demand signal within DHS to fund additional resources on the southwest border. So I don't want to end with doom and gloom. There's a lot of challenges that the Coast Guard faces, and I know we're not alone, but I'll say that I come to work every day working with the best people in the nation has to offer, and we're doing some of the best missions ever. And so even though we have our challenges, I'm confident we're lining the resources up to meet those.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you very much. It's good to see that you have to go out, but you don't necessarily have to come back, right?
Yes,
That's the way it goes.
That's right.
Brad, please.
Thanks, CNO. Good morning, and I'm excited to be here today as CNO's representative to talk a little bit about budgeting and resourcing. So to answer the question, at least kind of obliquely, the Navy is currently resource challenged in meeting the National Defense Strategy and National Security Strategy with the current continuing resolution in FY24, the threat of sequestration from the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and the loss of buying power due to rising costs from prior high inflation. To give you some numbers, a full-year CR would reduce the Navy's top line by about $11 billion this year. When combined with the restrictions on how we can spend our money under a CR, that impact doubles to about $22 to $23 billion. So our FY24 PresBud request was $202 billion. So, 5 to 10% of a reduction, and we're already halfway through this fiscal year. It's very significant for us, and we'll talk more about impacts on that later. Now, we are mitigating the impacts as best we can right now, but a full-year CR would be unprecedented, and cause very serious damage to our ability to execute the defense and security strategies. If Congress can pass our 2024 budget as submitted by the President, then that would put us on a path to fulfill the national security strategy. Our 24 budget makes key investments in strategic deterrence, readiness, long-range fires, munitions, cyber, and most importantly, our people and the quality of their service. We also invested heavily in supporting the defense industrial base and supply chains, especially the submarine industrial base, to improve new construction performance and in-service repair. It also supports AUKUS, which in itself is a major strategic partnership to bolster security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. However, fulfilling the national security strategy is about much more than resources alone. As CNO Franchetti has charged us with in delivering America's warfighting Navy, our focus is on warfighters, warfighting, and the foundation that supports them. I see this audience and those who are joining us online as essential components in this effort. The entire defense ecosystem contributes to our ability to recruit and train warfighters, to develop and deliver technology we need for the current and the future fight, and to maintain and modernize our assets and equipment to fulfill the missions assigned to us in the national security strategy. As an example, our investments in the submarine industrial base are pivotal in fulfilling the national security strategy. This includes over $2.3 billion currently executed, another $1.6 billion planned for FY24 to FY27, alongside an additional $2.4 billion for sustainment efforts. These strategic efforts across critical areas such as supplier development, shipyard infrastructure, and workforce development are essential for ensuring the submarine industrial base remains robust and capable of countering adversaries' threats effectively and thereby contributing directly to our strategy. I ask all of you for your help in your individual roles, whether as a project manager, a welder, a recruiter, a sailor doing maintenance on a ship. You all serve a vital role in enabling us to fulfill the national security strategy. I am not immune to this either. As the Navy's representative in integrating our resources and capabilities, I am laser focused on ensuring we stay resourced for the current and future fight. Let me end on this note. While we may be facing challenges with resourcing and recruiting, the Navy is strong, ready, and present today. We are present in the Western Pacific to deter China. We are engaged in the Mediterranean and the Red Seas, protecting free trade and commerce from violent extremism. We are operating all around the world, serving our Title X mandate to support peacetime promotion of U.S. national security interests and prosperity. Just turn on the news and make no mistake, we are ready for prompt and sustained combat if called upon by the President. The decisive decade is upon us, and the Navy's conventional deterrence is critical in deterring China. And if the resources are constrained, then we will prioritize the readiness of deployed and next to deploy forces so the nation can always count on the Navy to protect them. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. And thank you. I found your figures quantifying the impact of CR. We're going to come back to that because I think that's a good message. Rarely do, it's going to be terrible, bad, pick your adjective or adverb. But when you quantify it, say, what would you do with $11 billion? Say, yeah, that's okay, I'll take that, et cetera, or not, if you have a bogey. So General Adams, please.
Hey, thanks, CNO. And ladies and gentlemen here live, those online, it truly is an honor to be a part of this panel. Brad and I, in our Pentagon bunker every day, fighting the fight, are a key team here in the Dawn to fight the things that we're talking about. But it's great to get out of the building, get here to San Diego, and really talk the truth about the things that are really kind of building, a bow wave is building with regards to the budget, and how it impacts not just our national security strategy, but our future defense of the way of life that we have as Americans. As someone, a Marine, who was asked about 6 years ago to turn in his TO weapon of an AH-1 Super Cobra and pick up his new TO weapon, a pivot table and a calculator, I will tell you I've learned that those tools are key weapons as we fight this fight, and it's a key fight to try to convince those who would control the purse strings how critically important it is that we have capabilities. But in all seriousness, it's critically important that we talk about this today and discuss it frankly. And frankly,
the fiscal situation that we're in right now is extremely complicated and extremely dire. And I break it down really because we could spend a whole session talking about the effects of inflation, continuing resolutions, the other things that affect this very complicated scenario. But it's really all about uncertainty, and it's about lost buying power. Uncertainty because we have just gone through, over the past 4 years, a time of inflation that we had never seen since like the 80s. And that inflation continues to affect what we do today. I agree. If you look at the numbers, it peaked back in 2022 at about 9.1%, and it's down to about 3.1 as of January. The effects of that 9.1% inflation in 22, when our purchasing power and our outlays were identified 2 years prior, when that inflation didn't exist, it just compounds. And we've all heard about compounding interest and the effect of it, and if you add the interest on the plus side, it grows your investment. The flip of that is the same. And so we continue to have problems with uncertainty in the inflation and how it affects our buying power. And that buying power, the dollar that we have today, and you will hear people say the FY23 budget was the biggest one that the department has ever had, so you should make do with that. It was also impacted the most by all the inflationary factors that existed at the time. And so the buying power of the dollar in 23 didn't match the next highest one. And there is no silver bullet to solving this problem because it is complicated, because it's uncertain. But I will tell you, sufficient, stable, and predictable resourcing is a long way, and it's totally within our control as a government. You know, the Marine Corps as the department and really the nation's expeditionary force and readiness is a key contributor to what we have in the national security strategy and the national defense strategy in contributing to integrated deterrence, being forward, acting with our allies and partners, creating strategic dilemmas for our adversary. And we have to balance with the limited resources that we have, the balance between readiness and modernization. What does that mean? The difference between current ops and future ops. How do we balance? Because if we go all in on readiness and we forego modernization, eventually what you have there on the field, right? All players on the field from the CNO, it is not going to be effective against the adversary. So you have to modernize. But if you go all in on modernization, then you won't be ready or in position to affect if we're called to fight. And so we have to balance that continuously. And how have we been able to balance that as a Corps? It's really through hard choices. For the past 5 POM cycles, the Marine Corps, starting with General Neller as the 37th Commandant, decided that we were not man-trained or equipped for the future fight. And we have divested of $18.2 billion in capability, in structure, over the past 5 cycles, while rolling that in to the tune of about $15.8 billion back into modernization. And that has gotten us in a position now where we have 4 deployed forces in INDOPACOM doing the do, actually using capabilities that are a deterrent to the adversary. But the bottom line is, no matter, we went through a divestment to invest cycle, now we're looking at trying to modernize and balance with readiness. We are not going to ever have all the resources that we want in our budget. And that's why the unfunded priority list, or UPL, will never be empty. And we always have to figure out what needs to be on there and what needs to be in the base budget and make sure that our critical capabilities and our critical readiness is in the base budget, and then put those things that we would find that we would need on the unfunded priority list. And I hope we have some questions about that, because there are some key aspects of the 25 unfunded priority list that we're working through right now that are different than any one that we've ever done in the past. I'm getting ready to wrap it up here, but I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders, from our positions as kind of resource sponsors and resource managers of the services, but all the way down to the small unit level, to make informed decisions. We heard it from the SecNav. We can't make quick decisions out of trying to act quickly without thinking through the problem. And that's what we're trying to do, is make the best decisions we can, the right choices that we have to make, analyze what's going on, prioritize, and accept risk where risk is acceptable. We need to be best postures to respond in the future, and that is our contract with the nation, that we'll be ready when the nation needs us. And I'll end kind of along where Brad ended. We're going to talk a lot of doom and gloom here today, because I think it's important to highlight, and not in a technical way. We have to stay away from the technical jargon, because you can get really lost in the sauce when you start talking about the technical aspects of the budget. I'm going to try to break it down with raw numbers. I've got the numbers too. I'm going to save them for a little bit later, because the impact of a full year continuing resolution and sequestration is detrimental to the service. But despite all the bad stuff we're going to talk about today, your United States Marine Corps, your Expeditionary Fighting Force in readiness is strong. They are motivated, they're in position, and none of us would have ever become a Marine if we thought it was going to be easy, right? It's hard. And we're out there trying to solve the hard problems, provide the nation what it needs, be innovative, and protect our way of life. That's our contract to you, to this nation, as the United States. So I look forward to your questions, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Rayman. So I look out in the audience and I see some former colleagues and still friends, and therefore probably you remember, as these folks were talking about the challenges today, do you remember, before 9/11 it was, we're too big, we're all shaped for the Cold War, so we're going to transform, we'll be smaller but more effective. Okay. Then it was, you guys getting ready for the Cold War and wanting to buy all this other stuff, we got to win the wars we're in, because we were in the Mideast. Then it was, holy cow, we got peer competitors. So what they're dealing with today is a little bit of both. The smaller skirmishes, we're back in the Mideast. Who knows how long, but we're doing the things we're doing today, and the peer competitors. So a little bit of both. What we're going to get to, these guys were teasing you on what they want to talk about, but if you were at Admiral Paparo's plenary session yesterday, one of the things I think he was sending as a message as a customer was, look, I got all this argument about size and this and that, but what are we going to do with the resources we have today? Because I'm the customer and I want you to do something effective and innovative now. And then SecNav this morning said, well, in order to do the things that we'd really like to do, to manage the resources, we have to have regular order. We need a budget on time. We need confirmed people to staff up and manage all of this. So we're going to try and bring both of these together here with a little bit of a moderated Q&A. So I'll throw the first question out. As soon as the folks go through this, go to the mic if you want to get in depth in that or something else. Now, some of you addressed this question, so pass if you want, as we talked about. So the first question for you is, okay, look, if your service does not have enough resources to attain or sustain the capabilities that are in the National Defense Strategy or your programming guidance or your respective services, what capabilities or programs, to the degree you want to talk about it, do you need? And I'm not asking you for your euphorist, but I kind of am asking for your unfunded requirements list or capability. So we'll go back through again. Matt?
Yes, sir. So the Coast Guard does have an unfunded priorities list, like the other services. Really, our big need that usually are things that we cannot fund in our own budget are related to some of our aircraft investments, as well as some of our surface investments. Thinking about our fast response cutters. So these are cutters that we're actively going to deploy in the Indo-Pacific to assist with countering the threat there. Aircraft that we use for every mission that we do. Think C-130s to conduct maritime surveillance, as well as our shore infrastructure. Most of our, we have roughly 270 installations around the United States and overseas, which most of those are relatively small, but a lot of them were built in the 1800s, 18 and 1900s, and those are in bad shape. And so we've got to invest there. That's really critical for us. The other thing that we also need to invest in is our organic industrial infrastructure to maintain the fleet that we have. Because of the diminishing manufacturing base and because of challenges that we heard about shipyards and other aspects of the defense industrial base, we've got to make sure we have a robust organic ability to maintain the assets that we have today, as well as, to the General's point, as we modernize our fleet, making sure we're capable of maintaining those assets when they come online. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Matt. Brad?
Yeah, so as we look to roll out PB25 here, hopefully in the next month, then it will obviously become very clear on what our requirements are for an unfunded priority list. So we're still right now actually working through on what scale that will be and what the prioritization will be inside of that. 25 is a very challenging year anyway because of the Fiscal Responsibility Act for the debt ceiling negotiated position. So it's about 1% more than what we submitted for PB25. So, and Rayman talked about this about buying power. That's not what we're seeing for inflation, or even more importantly than inflation is cost growth across the board. And that's transferred, from inflationary factors, but also, commodities as we move up through and receive our funds. Rayman alluded to this. We went up about 20% in budget between FY21 to FY24. And the reason we did that is because it kind of reflects the CPI at the time of about 8% average per year, so 2.5 years of that, 20%. So no more buying power, and yet a lot more money that you can see. Navy has more than $1 trillion in the FYDP right now. It seems like a lot of money to be able to spend. We'll focus as we move forward on capabilities that we think that can deliver in the time frame of concern for us. The Navy believes in the Davidson window, and so as you heard testimony a few years ago, that's 2027. If you haven't looked at the calendar yet, it's 2024 right now. That's a very short time away. So our focus is very much on delivering capabilities to the fleet now, making sure they have ready forces now, and making sure that we're ready for any event in 27. As the CNO has put out her America's Warfighting Navy, she's really focused on the continuum of CNOs, her predecessors, Admiral Greenert being one of them, obviously, and being able to carry that torch forward. What does she deliver to the next CNO in 2027? And obviously, that's a huge risk year. So how does she turn over the best, most lethal Navy possible in that year? And so we're chartered to be able to come up with that within our constrained resources.
Thank you. Rayman?
Hey, thanks, sir. Really good question. And no matter how hard you twist my arm, I'm not going to reveal what's on our UPL for 25. However, much like Brad, we are, in fact, I just was exchanging information with the General Mahoney just last night over the discussions. And we're trying to figure out for 25, you have 21 days post-budget release to kind of unveil your UPL to Congress. And just to alleviate any rumors about what the unfunded priority list is, it's codified in law, it's statute, right? Section 222 alpha states that the service chiefs will communicate directly with, not pass through, but directly with Congress on the things on their that were not able to fit into their budget that they would like to ask for, that were unfunded. And I talked about it in my opening comments. The unique aspect of the 25 process was we were given the FRA caps that we had to be constrained to. And so while we came into it just looking at, okay, what did we do in 23? And then what did we plan in 24 and release? While 24 was still in the process of being approved, that's when the FRA was signed into law, and it imposed caps on 24 and 25. And those caps were really, really detrimental to what, it forced some very, very hard choices. And so right now we're looking at what does that list appear to be. We are really going to try. We think it's a good message and a logical message that those things that we were constrained from not being able to put on our budget in 25 that should have been based on the caps from the FRA, we intend on trying to put those on the unfunded priority list. They orient around key force design initiatives, so things that we want to accelerate. So think modernization, the things that are now just starting to be fielded in terms of capability, we are trying to increase the capacity of those things. And we're unable to do that because of the FRA caps. We'd like to get that back in. Things with our manpower, maturation in our talent management force design. There's some aspects of that that part of the portfolio that we would like to see inside of our unfunded priority list. And then, and it's been in the news of late, we've been paying attention to it very carefully. We had attempted in 24 and in 25 to put additional quality of life. Now I'm talking about facilities, the foundation that the CNO would talk about, the quality of life improvements to try to bring up to facilities condition index that's acceptable, our barracks, our facilities, our child care centers. So we intend on trying to put some of that on as well, because we were constrained by the FRA of not being able to add it on our 25. So right now, we are not sure how big it's going to be. I will tell you the Marine Corps, traditionally, if you look historically across the UPL lists that we have submitted in the past, it varies from one year where we submitted none to one where we submitted almost $4 billion in everywhere in between. And so we will see with negotiations and approval from the Commandant right after we release the 25 budget. And I think it will highlight to you all who are looking at the budgets what basically got pulled out from the FRA. So thanks for the question, sir.
So you may have it narrowed down to between 0 and 4 billion. Maybe.
Maybe.
We're not going to quote you on that. We have a question. Admiral Harris?
Uh-oh.
And thank you, CNO. Thank you, gentlemen, for all you're doing. So the question up front, is the $4.3 billion request from the White House to accelerate the submarine program enough to mitigate what I describe to folks as the pig in the budgetary python of the Columbia? The Columbia SSBN is the most important, arguably, asset for our strategic defense as a nation and for our partners, bar none. But it squeezes all the oxygen out of the room for everything else if it has to be funded through purely Navy budget. There was talk before about a national strategic fund or something else like that that would draw money from outside of that in order to make that pig a little smaller and more digestible so that other things that are necessary can be done. Is there any hope for that type of fund? Is that plan gone away? Is a $4.3 billion request enough? That's my question. Thank you.
Sink, I'll take that question because I think it's directed towards me. So, under CNO Gilday, our prioritization for our program consistently through his 4 years was Columbia, readiness, capabilities, and capacity. So we stay pretty true to that. And that doesn't mean it precludes funding. So if it was capacity, we just sold all the capacity to do Columbia or strategic deterrence. So there's some good news about how we've approached the problem on funding on that. We understand very much the limitations on our submarine industrial base, and I talked about that briefly up front. There's also a $3.3 billion supplemental currently that's on the Hill in the House right now that's directed towards submarine industrial base, specifically to raise our numbers of deliveries to 1 Columbia's plus 2 Virginia-class submarines per year. That's a big lift. Columbia is about the equivalent of about almost 2.5 Virginias as far as the construction required man days. So that's hard. We haven't gotten help over the years as far as Columbia funding in the past. I have gone in the last 2 years for PB 23 and 24 to OSD requesting additional funds for that. And those have been provided. So it is a giant rock in our jar that keeps expanding. But we have done a pretty good job articulating that to not only OSD, OMB, but also the Hill on the requirements of that. It's looked at as a no-fail mission, and so it's not necessarily the funding issue. I'm more concerned about the impacts to the submarine industrial base as we focus on Columbia to make sure it's successful and the impacts it might have to Virginia production.
Thank you, Brad. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Hi, Al Burke, U.S. Naval Institute member. My question is whether we have the right high-low mix or whether we even have one to meet our target of 355 ships. In the 80s, we had the Spruances and we had the FFG-7s. Constellation's going to cost $1.2 billion, the first one. With inflation, probably not going to go down by a lot. Can we get to our required ship numbers, or do we need something closer to maybe the Japanese Mogami or the Danish Absalon class frigates that are less than 400 million apiece?
Yeah, that's a great question. So high-low mix is continuously looked at and is very much part of 355 and new numbers that will be coming out in the future. That includes what the battle force mix will be. And actually we are increasing the number of small surface combatants in those numbers than what we've had before. Lethal small surface combatants. The Secretary spoke briefly about adding additional lethality to the LCS class, and so right now that is our small surface combatant that's out there. And so focus on that in the very near term and build a frigate. You may have seen in the NDAA last year that we are now required to include SM-6 and Tomahawk on the second and follow frigates. So that will be a very lethal combatant in a small size at less than half the cost overall as a DDG Flight 51 Flight 3, with much less sustainment costs, a much smaller crew that's focused on their mission. So it should be much more cost effective to do many of the missions that destroyers have to do today. So we're excited about that program. We just need to start delivering those platforms. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no pending questions, we'll go to another moderated questions, if you will. So, Matt, we'll come to you. In the areas under your purview, please describe the first and second order effects of the following. Inflation changes after you're done with the budget. You've submitted it, but yet, whoa, things change with inflation. A full year continuing resolution or a half year continuing resolution, which is basically where we are now, and a 1% sequester. And so some of you who have laid some numbers out, I would ask you to do it again, because a wise public affairs officer told me you got to repeat the message if you have something tangible you want people to take down. So Matt, please.
Yeah, so while I haven't talked about it yet, inflation has hit us hard too. I would say, so as a non-defense, most of the funding that we get is not budget code 050 or function 50. So it's treated a little bit differently across from DOD. So we are prohibited from requesting funding for non-pay inflation, right? So essentially, except for pay gets inflated. So if we get a 5.2% pay raise, that's included as part of the budget request. Non-pay inflation, so reduced buying power, we eat that. So essentially where we see the biggest impacts are depot level maintenance. So think, ship repair, aircraft repair. We also see impacts with basic things like operations of our installations. So those are the big near-term impacts. We also see it in shipbuilding, aircraft production. We've had dramatic cost increases directly related to inflation in a number of our shipyards, even where we have steady production, not just some of the new start construction yards. So yes, inflation is a big impact for us, and it's caused some tough trade-offs inside the budget. In terms of full-year CR, that's a bit of a moving target for us because we're within Department of Homeland Security. There's some decisions that Congress will have to make, even in a full-year CR, about how to allocate some of that funding based on our appropriation structure. But at a high level, the number is somewhere between $750 million and $1 billion for a $13.7 billion budget. So it's substantial. Most of that impact is in our operations and sustainment funding. And part of that is we have to eat pay raises and other things within a constrained top line. So that means reduced money for fuel, maintenance, and so forth. So what does that do? That deteriorates readiness very rapidly. It took us probably about 9-10 years to recover from the 2011 Budget Control Act, where we had sequester. So that's a huge impact. It's very concerning for us. In terms of a half-year CR, where we are today, that's about how do you spend your money. You know, if somebody's doling out money a little bit at a time and you don't know when you're going to get the big pot of money, it forces you to make bad decisions, right? Or suboptimal decisions. Whereas if you have all the money up front, you're able to do good planning and good execution and make best use of the money you have. So these continuing short-term CRs really have an erosion on the buying power that's compounding with interest, with inflation.
So if I hear you right, you asked for $13 billion. Had you got it, if you get it authorized and appropriated, you get $13 billion. Full-year CR, it's like taking $1 billion of the $13 billion and shredding it.
Yes, essentially.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Brad?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Matt, but I'm going to lose the amount of money that's in your entire budget. So
That doesn't make me feel good.
no, it doesn't. No. When we talk about inflation changes, I've kind of expanded that narrative out to cost growth because it's inflation that we have seen, and it's very difficult to take consumer price index and move it over to defense and have it be a meaningful metric. So we have seen during COVID, there were examples of aluminum for about a year and a half went up by 100%. And then they were showing me curves that would come down and it would only go up by about 2%. But I said, but we absorbed the 100% change, right? So you start inflating again from that higher cost. So you never go back down. It's not deflation ever. It's always increasing, and that means that your buying power always moves in the wrong direction. So cost growth includes, the performance of our contractors. And so I think you've all, for my industry partners out here, you've seen that. So you're building something, but you require another partner to provide you with a part for that. Whether it's GFE, government furnished equipment, or contractor furnished equipment, and you can't get it. So now you're delayed in what you're doing, even if you were on schedule. So that delay translates to additional cost, and it translates to late deliveries, right? So you're behind, and then we're unhappy, you're unhappy, and we try to solve that. So that's something that I think the Navy's going to be very committed with you as we move forward on driving down through your supply chains to make sure we understand where your bottlenecks are in a post-COVID environment and be able to help in that way so we get the products out and into the warfighter's hands as soon as possible. As an example, I was seeing about 20 to 30% cost growth in my shipbuilding accounts over the last 2 years. That's an unsustainable rate of cost growth. So that will either mean, as we talked about the number of platforms and trying to build a larger Navy that we need, how do you do that when the costs of the platforms are now far exceeding what we initially budgeted? I take a lot of questions on cost estimation and on an S-curve. So cost estimation is an S-curve of cost, and in the middle of that is a 50% confidence that you're going to have that cost, and that's how we budget to. And what we're seeing is mostly at the very high end of the cost curve, or we'd have to draw another curve. So it's not the cost estimation process, it's just what has happened, which has been unprecedented, as Raymond said, since the early 1980s, as far as the changes in how we're doing business in the US. A full year CR versus a half year CR. So it's sad to say, but a half year CR is essentially normal business. About 19 of the last 20 budget cycles have been in a CR of some length, whether that was a good one ends in December and a bad one ends in March. And that's what we're looking at. March is our best case this year. So we understand how to do that, but how that impacts you directly. And one of the better examples I've seen is in the IT world, because West is very IT heavy, compared to Sea Aerospace even. It's very heavy out here, and I understand the problems that you have. So when you do IT, I send you money on a contract at the beginning of the year, hopefully, right? And you start your sprints. And you need time to do sprints. And you work with the partner, which would be ourselves, right? And we do sprints through the year with constant funding, and we get our product at the end of the year. If I give you your money on a new contract, especially a new start, in the middle of March, I only have 6 months to do sprints. So your entire schedules fall apart, right? And again, you're unhappy, we're unhappy, and it's not our fault, right? It's actually how the money is being flowing to DoD. Full year CR. Unprecedented, as I said before, and to repeat the numbers, about $11 billion reduction inside the Navy budget. We had a 4.5% growth from PB23, so that's what we're losing. And you're losing that in the middle of the year. So that means that you're even farther behind than that, so it'll get exceptionally tight. We will prioritize ready platforms and operations over investments if we have a full year CR. So that means that obviously in a full year CR, I don't do new starts, so we don't have to worry about that. That just doesn't happen. But it also goes into the things that we buy that we would have bought this year that were in the PresBud submission, we will not be able to buy. And then I'll have to ask permission from Congress to move money over from those accounts into that into that giant hole that I now have in readiness to just solve this year. The secondary impact of an annualized CR is that how do I start next year? We are consistently in a CR, as we said, so we will continue through at least the first quarter of FY25, starting this next October, right, at the same level, essentially PresBud 23 plus 1%. So I'm even in a worse position because of all the things we said on the first topic, which is cost growth and inflation. So it's really incumbent that our government takes care of their business right now, that we get an appropriation and we can get back on track. We haven't talked about PB25 is not based on PB24 plus 1%. It's based on the PB24 submission. So it will be completely misaligned. So inflation in the year that we deal with it, I cut things. I do above threshold reprogrammings, below threshold reprogrammings, and I try to move money around, and then I ask Congress to help me. So PB25 will essentially be a giant reprogramming while the budget is sitting in Congress if we don't have a 24 appropriation. 1% sequester is a charted area that Admiral Greenert had to deal with in 2013. And what that actually means that each appropriation that we have actually drops. So it's all stovepiped, and each of them drop. And what normally happens is manpower is fenced, which we won't take any money out of manpower. And the only thing that's in the NDAA that was recently signed that is actual money, the appropriations do almost all the money except for pay raises. Pay raises we will have to pay even without an appropriations bill. So that exacerbates the problems across in sequester. There will be a lot of negotiations with OMB and the Hill on what sequestration means this time to be able to essentially not completely break our DoD, but those are some unknowns as we move forward. Thanks.
Real quick, Brad, if you will, what type of cost growth, inflation caused by inflation, are the departments, the services accommodated for? Does not OMB cover things like maybe fuel cost or other? Could you share at least by category?
That's actually good. In the commodities areas, based on, those are actually centrally managed by Defense Logistics Agency, like fuel. That's a variable rate that they put out. They do put out a list of rates for various, hard commodities, steel, other metals, lithium as an example. Those tend to be a little bit lagging metrics. In other words, they usually are very reflective of like the oil prices you see at the pump. If the price of a barrel went up, they went up really quickly. If the price of the barrel went down, not so much. It takes a lot longer.
Okay, Matt, similar case in Homeland Security?
No, so as I mentioned, we don't budget for non-pay inflation, so we get zero.
Okay.
We have to eat all of that inflation inside of our base.
Y'all ought to come on over to DOD. It's better. All right?
Yes, sir.
Rayman, to you.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I'm just going to, these guys have really covered well a lot of the things, and the cost growth aspect of inflation is, it's real. But I want to hit a couple things that people don't normally think about when it comes to inflation, and we consider it as a monolithic thing, like inflation is 9.1%. There are commodities in things that are specific that inflate at different rates. And just to put a couple of thoughts in the back of your mind, the cost of military construction over the past 2 years has increased by a rate of 20%, and it is not slowing down. So when I talk about quality of life and projects that we're going to try to do to build new, the cost of military construction is astronomically growing. Think about the cost of commercial shipping and commercial shipping containers that has gone up because inflation has driven it because of the activities of the Houthis in the Red Sea. All of those commercial ships that have to now go all the way around the Cape of Good Hope and not go through the shortest route, that has driven the cost of commercial shipping. And we transport a lot of material and people and things on commercial shipping using commercial shipping containers, which are at a premium. That's an inflationary aspect. So you can't really talk about, and Brad hit it well, everyone kind of wraps their mind around the CPI. That accounts for probably less than a third of the commodities that we deal with in the Department of Defense with regards to tracking it. It's a useful metric, but it doesn't solve all or identify all problems. The last thing I'll hit on is the fact that inflation reduces the buying power of our military men and women, right? The compensation that men and women receive for being a member of the all-volunteer force, the power of that small paycheck that they get is even less effective, particularly when it comes to sustenance and housing. In markets where housing prices have really spiked, it's very difficult for a new military member PCSing to a new station where they would otherwise rent using the BAH they've provided to find a place to rent because the cost of that rent has gone beyond what those rates are. And they do, in the department, they try in a lagging way to identify and compensate for those types of factors, but it makes it uncertain and unpredictable. With regards to the CR, so from the numbers for the Marine Corps, if we get a full year CR, it's not the same magnitude as the Navy, but we have a net funding shortfall. If you take what was in the budget request for 24 and mathematically subtract it straight line from what was enacted in 23, it's $1.4 billion. That is not the biggest problem of a full year CR. The biggest problem is that creates, based on the way it's implemented and the way it's laid in, a $3.3 billion funding misalignment across the Marine Corps, where you might not be able to capture that funding misalignment back. Brad talked about reprogramming actions. If we get a CR where, okay, that's the end, that is the official enacted budget for 24 for the rest of the year, we have never been able to allow, the committees have never allowed a reprogramming action under a CR condition. They have always waited until we get a full bill signed, an enacted bill. We're in uncharted territories. If we have $3.3 billion to maneuver, I can only imagine what the Navy misalignment is.
$26 billion.
And so that's like, it's created by a lot of factors. A CR, a continuing resolution, makes you pay for today's problems and priorities with yesterday's dollars. And it does not allow you to do new starts. It does not allow you to change procurement numbers of platforms. There are many, many factors in a continuing resolution that create this problem. And to go to the 1% sequester, if you put that on top of it in the Marine Corps, we're assessing, it's really hard to calculate because the guidance from OMB and OSD has not been received with regards to what the sequester rule is going to be. But we know MilPERS is going to be exempt. So everything else is going to have to pay the bill. And that $1.4 billion shortfall is bumped up to about $2.34 billion in the Marine Corps. Net funding shortfall. That's, to use the CNO's terms, it's evaporated. How do you like attack the things that you need to attack with that much of a shortfall? Given our 24 PB request was $53.2 billion. And then that 3.3 billion of misalignment under a full year CR, in the case of a sequester, bumps up to 3.8 billion. This is $750 million in MilPERS shortfalls. It's $500 million in O&M. It's $1.2 billion in MilCon. Every MilCon project, in the case of 24, the Marine Corps has 14 military construction projects that we have planned. 0 of 14 will be accomplished because those are technically new starts. 7 of those are in Guam against the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. RDT&E drops by $300 million. In procurement, the main impact to procurement is no quantity changes. So the plans that we had in the 24 budget to buy more missiles, to buy more airplanes, to buy more JLTVs, those are all null and void. You can't do that. And now you're delaying your modernization and you're sacrificing current and future ops. So in my opinion, the word disaster comes to mind. A full year CR, while some would say is a good solution or a good compromise, it absolutely is not. It is the worst case scenario, in my opinion. In some cases, worse than a sequester. So that was my scare the children.
You did it.
Back to you, sir.
Other than that, things are looking pretty good.
Looking pretty good.
Thank you for your patience. Go ahead, sir.
Really good morning. Terry Emmert with DARPA. Wise man once told me that budget equals strategy. And I would love to get your perspective on a specific area. Rainman, you mentioned it earlier, that balance that you struggle with between modernization and readiness. The department and the Don have embraced experimentation as a way of highlighting, identifying, promising new technology, getting it out in the hands of the warfighter. Would you mind offering your perspectives on utility of those efforts in helping you think through some of these tough trades that you've got to make between the current and the future?
Who wants to start?
Yeah, either one of you. I'm not out of. Speak up.
So in terms of budget equals strategy, I do agree. The other saying is resources or policy without resources equals poetry, right? I think that's the similar line of thought. Yeah, so the balance between modernization and readiness and how do you use, if I got the question correctly, where does innovation fit in there? So my view of this, my view, and the Coast Guard has struggled with this. We are an organization that is traditionally bound, even how we organize ourselves. There's cuttermen, aviators, and everybody else, and so each that has their own community that is invested with a certain capability that it's very difficult to let go of. I say one of the things that we're looking at now in the Coast Guard is, we have an aging fleet, right? We've all talked about the constraints associated with inflation and budgets, et cetera. But we're going to have to do business a little bit differently in the future if we expect to be effective. So part of that is what are the C5I capabilities that we're not invested in now that we can replace hard assets with potentially? What can we do to invest in new and innovative ways of networking, satellite capabilities, perhaps as a replacement to aircraft, unmanned systems. The other services are far ahead of us in terms of investing in that technology, and we're frankly a little bit behind the 8 ball there. And that is something that we have to invest in fairly quickly in order to stay effective given some of the challenges that we have today. So those are some of the things that Coast Guard's looking at in that space. Over.
Thanks, Matt. So actually, I love this question, so thank you for asking it. So we don't like to be accused of doing a budget-driven strategy, right? And yet, bringing Rayman up, you get into that position in the very near term based on the FRA. For a strategy-driven budget, we have great marching orders right now, and we've had them under CNO Gilday, and I mentioned it before, Columbia Readiness, Capability, and Capacity. And now under Warfighting, Warfighters, and the foundation that supports them for CNO Franchetti. But for her, what it really gets down to is more players on the field. And I just want to talk about that for a second as a strategy for what we want to do. And I did talk about the temporal perspective that she is bringing for looming threats in the very near term, but also shepherding the Navy into the three fit-ups, which DepSecDef talks about so much. So more players on the field is not just more platforms on the field. It is part of that. It is getting ships out of construction on time, at the capabilities that they're supposed to provide, getting them underway. The second one is getting ships out of maintenance with the modernization that's required to be lethal and significantly competitive in the fight across the world. The next one is using what we have differently, right? So that's innovation and thinking through that. And using things differently actually includes capabilities that can be added that are essentially small investments that we're making to make the platforms even more lethal. Integration of hybrid fleets. Really, I think you've seen the DepSecDef put out Replicator Initiative recently, and that we're really focused on that. And a lot of discussion over the first 2 days of the conference by both CNO and Pac Fleet Commander on hybrid fleets, unmanned, uncrewed, and integration of those all the way from machine teaming with human-machine teaming all the way to autonomy. That's big. And then the sustainment, the actual taking care of what you have in a much better way, which isn't maintenance. It's much more, comprehensive than maintenance on that. So from a strategy-driven budget, we actually applied lenses all the time to create the most lethal Navy that we can, but put it under this rubric of what's actually needed by the CNO's vision.
Anything, Raymond?
Yeah, just Terry, great question. It's great to see you also. The strategy, if you want somebody to see what your strategy is, just look at your budget, right? I mean, that's kind of an old adage. With regards to the innovation and experimentation enterprise and how it could affect and maybe enhance our ability to plan, so great point. What we refer to it in the Marine Corps as a campaign of learning, where you do look forward to future concepts, you take those concepts and you maybe have a couple of kind of demos, if you will, and experiment with them, and it's just you're constantly evolving. And so I would say, to your point, through our campaign of learning, those are how we're informing the tough choices that we're making, that we end up deciding and then revealing as our budget, is through this campaign of learning. And we apply it to not just buying the next widget, but we talk about it with regards to how do we set up the next formation. The Marine Littoral Regiment is a prime example of a fruit of a campaign of a learning. And then we also look at it as to how are we going to enhance retaining and recruiting the next group of Marines. And so it evolves. And I would say, kind of back to the point about IT being scrums and agile development, the campaign of learning is something where it's not rigid and very serial and linear. It's you figure out in this cycle, and we have a ton of Marines tied up in exercises that R&E has really bolstered. Research and Engineering, the Undersecretary, Ms. Hsu, has bolstered the Rapid Defense Experimentation Program and participating and contributing to those and some other conceptual work, because I think, what's the saying? We're out of money, now we got to think. Like, we're thinking a lot harder about how to solve this problem. That's not going to prevent us from fighting to try to get the right decisions done as a nation and making those choices that we have the ability to make. We should eliminate the known variables through action, in my opinion. And we should echo the SECNAV this morning, imploring our nation's leadership to eliminate as much uncertainty as we can through actions that we are in control of. But I really like that idea of leveraging experimentation to help inform and decide what your next choice is going to be.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Question.
Sir, good morning, CNO, gentlemen. Lieutenant Snipes, HEC Wingpack AMSA. So in every great power and counterterrorism conflict, we've relied on the Navy Reserve for surge capacity and depth at the tactical level, especially in naval aviation. This is a question for you, Vice Admiral Skillman. It's a two-part question.
Okay.
First, Lieutenant General Adams mentioned platforms, so I kind of brought this up. Since 2001, the Navy has cut over 90% of CNAFR's tactical units from VFA to VP, and most recently eliminating the reserve HSC community, despite them being consistently deployed and instead of retasking them to support Navy missions for GPC. So first question is, how has the elimination of CNAFR's surge capacity in strained communities assisted the Navy's budget or ability to meet its operational requirements? And then secondly, SECNAF discussed preservation of warfighters. So given that naval aviation is operating in a state of quote-unquote criticality, has there been or are you aware of any discussions between N4, L4 Combat Logistics, 98, or at WARCOM specifically, with regards to reconstitution of the force, either reintegration or en route care? It's it's complicated.
Very.
I actually didn't. I think I need to have my hearing checked again, but
Yeah, the problem is the way these speakers are. If you would come a little bit closer to your microphone and then just go through the two questions again.
Yes, sir. How has the elimination of CNAFR's surge capacity in strained communities assisted the Navy's budget or ability to meet its operational requirements? And item number two is, seeing that the SECNAF discussed preservation of warfighters, given that naval aviation is operating in a state of criticality, has there been or are you aware of any discussions between N4, L4 Combat Logistics and N98 or at WARCOM discussions with regards to reconstitution of the force, should we get punched in the face, with regards to reintegration and en route care?
okay, yeah, I think I got those. So from your first question, we're actually very focused on that right now. It's something, what we try to do is, and I think Rayman and Matt will say the same things, is like, we don't want to pass the buck, right? You know, and we want to take care of problems as we see them and start getting after what we see as either decadal or generational problems that we have. So your first question is really one of those, is we've kind of passed it to the fact that it's on my plate now, right? So that I have to deal with. Specifically, if we want to talk about KC-130T replacement to 130Js, right? We're behind the other services in doing that, and we know that we need to, and it's never popped over, you know, being the most critical thing that year to be able to address. And so it's something that I'm a big advocate for, because it's actually, not only is it good for, you know, transportation, but it's actually good for the Navy long term based on, you know, aging aircraft and replacing those with fully supported aircraft that are still in production. So, you know, that's an area for that. I think that the discussions that we're having on as you move through, you know, how we actually do the warfight through protraction and, you know, in a contested logistics way, and the 5 Rs, right, really have a lot of momentum right now. The joint warfighting concept includes contested logistics as a key tenet. I'm very focused, and the SECNAV actually talked about that today, about, you know, you win or lose based on logistics. We've been doing joint games for the last decade, and we've said every time we looked at China that logistics is the pacing function that we have. We recognized last year that we had insufficient sustainment of our oilers in the fleet, so we added a lot of money 2 years ago. I won't talk about this year, but 2 years ago we had a lot of money to make sure that we can sustain through the decade of concern, and then double down on actually procurement of additional platforms. But that's just basic logistics. That's not what Admiral Paparo and the Secretary talked about console tanking, to be able to do that smarter, to bring the oil to the CLF ship and then take it the next level. But when you get into, you know, revive and restore, right? those are challenges that we're looking at very deeply because a real fight, we're designed for a peacetime mission that has occasionally a ship will go bump in the night and we bring them back to the United States, and we can't afford to do that in a hot war. So those are really good questions. I think that the teams are really laser focused on those right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing some good solutions as we move through this cycle. Thanks for the question.
Thanks. Go ahead, Lieutenant.
Morning, CNO. Morning, gentlemen. Lieutenant Chris Taylor, instructor at the Surface Advanced Warfighting School. With SMIDC's recent establishment of the Surface Requirements Group, or SURFRG, to help align the fleet's priorities to the OPNAV, have you seen an overall increase in lethality across the force, sir?
I do. I actually think that we are actually kind of going back to the future. We had readiness squadrons in the 90s, and we got away from them, and we've realized that it's really a smart way to do business. I actually have a captain who works for me who stood up the original one in Japan, and so I've got a lot of lessons learned. I'm a full supporter of that. I think that it's one of the ways that you want to put, what I say often is you value what you manage, and if you want to manage it properly, this is the way to do that. And so we're moving out on that. It's going rapidly, and so I think that we'll be fully stood up in the next year or so. There's some growing pains with it, but it's the right kind of focus on what we have to do to get the ships moving in the right directions and get them out of maintenance on time, fully capable and fully lethal to go into combat. So it should be good. I don't see any fiscal problems with it right now.
Okay, I have one more moderated question, and we're going to shift the topic a bit to supplemental. So since the first Iraqi war, we, collectively, the DoD, have found that, it's very hard to authorize and appropriate enough money to accommodate combat, increase in operational tempo due to deterrence, increased deterrence effect, a natural disaster or disasters, an increase in attrition of the forces. So a supplemental appropriation was invented, if you will. It's outside the budget, it's outside caps, but it's important. Remember OCO went on forever, and it was the kind of the eggplant that ate Chicago, as they say. It became so enormous, it was a fairly large percentage of the budget. So with that having been said, please describe what needs to be in a near-term supplemental due to the fact that some of what I just listed is in fact going on today. Combat, op-tempo, natural disasters, and we've had a lot of attrition. So please talk about, if you don't know monetarily, what are you seeing out there from weapons, sensors, operations and maintenance, lost equipment, and or facilities from natural disasters? And I'll go Matt, and then come forward.
Okay.
We have about 4 minutes, so lightning round here.
Yeah, so as I mentioned up front, the big one that that Coast Guard's focused on was the emergency border supplemental. There were some funds in there. There's a lot of funds in there for CBP, ICE, and some other agencies to help manage Southwest border, the flow across the Southwest border. That also has a direct nexus on the Coast Guard because essentially all that money's coming out of the same place to include the Coast Guard's budget. So if that doesn't get funded, that directly impacts us. It impacts our service. So in terms of, emergency supplementals writ large and the discussion about the Middle East, so the Coast Guard does have 6 patrol boats over there and a modest size force relative to the size of the Coast Guard over in Bahrain that does some support over there. There was some impacts, monetary impacts, and there continues to be. So that's obviously an area of interest of ours. Another big one for us is the maritime migration surge, although not currently included in any of the emergency supplementals. We came fairly close to saturating our flight decks with migrants roughly a year and a half ago. This was about a little bit after the assassination of the Haitian prime minister. That caused a tremendous amount of turmoil in Haiti. And so we came close to having a mass maritime migration, which would have had huge impacts to us. We would have had to call the Navy and ask for a bunch of big decks. So that's an area where we have to make sure we're focusing sufficient resources to deter and prevent a mass migration.
Real quick, my takeaway is, hey, look, this part of the larger supplemental, that border part, solved a lot of your problems, and you're in that. you may generate more, and it may be included in there, or you'll have to open up something new in a request. Is that right?
Yeah, likely it would come something new, sir.
Okay, thank you. Brad?
Yeah, I'll talk about the border request also. So how that has been funded each year is that it becomes a DoD bill when we don't get money for it. So
Thank you, sir.
I expect a $600 million bill for the border if we don't have a supplemental on top of the other problems I have. It'll be a must-pay bill. So weapons and sensors, obviously from a perspective of the Red Sea engagements that you've seen, as of last week, I think we'd expended about $260 million worth of missiles and equipment in that fight. Replacement value is a little over $500 million. It's probably updated since we've had additional engagements, and that's just going to continue to build. So without a supplemental, that requirement just goes back into my base budget, which is already hugely constrained. Secondarily, the impact, which is kind of a lagging impact or delayed a little bit, is that you heard the secretary say that Ford was extended twice to an 8-month deployment. Batons have been extended. This is the third extension right now, so another month or two, whatever they're going to extend it to eventually. But that turns into not only the operations themselves and the cost to operate those ships at that time, which is a drain, which would go into a supplemental, but also the maintenance that's now required to bring it. You ate readiness when you keep a ship out. More things have broken that we didn't expect to break on a 6 or 7 month deployment if it goes 8 or 9 months or 10 months. So we'll bring those back and reassess those platforms, and then it'll be additional money. Those are the ones that are the hardest to recover in a supplemental. Because it comes after everybody has forgotten what you did to the platform. And so we bring it up to OSD and to Congress, but what we've kind of figured out over time is we kind of have to lead turn that and kind of plan ahead. And so I'm going to pay for the guy who went last year with a request this year, and understand that I'll pay for the next guy on the next request, because it's always lagging. Supplementals will be hugely important in FY25, specifically if our operational tempo is the same and we're obviously under this debt ceiling agreement. So supplementals will be part of a way of life, and we'll have to approach those thoughtfully.
Thank you. Raymond?
Hey, so you probably have read in the paper earlier this week, the Senate approved a national security supplemental, about $95.3 billion. Just inside of that one, and it was tailored towards Ukraine, Israel, and so on. It primarily, the big piece of that for the Marine Corps was current ops in support of the 26th MEU over there, conducting preparations for activities in the Mediterranean Sea. And so that is a big, there are chunks of these supplementals that apply to us, much like Brad in the Navy. Like, we're not shooting missiles over there right now, but we have been providing the Ukrainians munitions as a part of the Presidential Drawdown Authority, and that supplemental is the way we get paid back for the things that we've given up. So we've given up munitions and capabilities, but we haven't been paid back for those. And then the last thing I'll hit on, which is really germane to this part of the country, destructive weather. So last year we had destructive weather, which created about $970 million worth of damage on Basilone Road at Camp Pendleton, up north of here, from the torrential rains. There was also a hurricane typhoon in Guam, where we're trying to repair there. And right now, the bill for that, this is previous storms, is $970 million. And so we got to figure out how we're going to pay for that. In addition to the tasking to support our friends at the Department of Homeland Security along the southwest border. We have Marines from both of our Marine Expeditionary Forces down there conducting operations, and we're cash flowing it because we're in a CR, and there's no money in a supplemental to pay us back for that. And I would say, lastly, with the projection of forecast of weather ops, never fails on the East Coast, you're going to have a hurricane, right? And so our base always is required to you don't plan for that in your budget, right? You don't plan for combat ops, you don't plan for destructive weather in your budget. You need a supplemental to alleviate the pressure. But here's the thing, in a CR, the margin to absorb those types of unexpected, unanticipated activities is not close to zero. So like right now, the Basilone Road the construction and repair isn't happening because we have no margin because we're operating under a continuing resolution. And the last thing I'll hit on the continuing resolution, because I really want you all to voice your opinion loud and proud and tell people this is not a good thing. In a continuing resolution of the past, it eventually ends and there's a bill that's passed and you get paid back what you didn't get for maybe the first 6 months of the year. In a full year CR, you never get paid back. And like Brad said, you're starting 25 with what was enacted in the last bill, which was 23. And so you thought you were behind a little bit in 24. Imagine what it's like in 25. So, anyway, worst case scenario, continuing resolution. Please, speak loud, speak proud.
This has been soberingly insightful. Admiral Greenert, General Adams, Admiral Skillman, Admiral Lake, thank you for your time and insights today. We'd like to present you on the behalf of the Naval Institute and AFCEA International, a Naval Institute press book, U.S. Naval Power in the 21st Century, a New Strategy for Facing the Chinese and Russian Threat by Brent Sadler with a AFCEA International bookmark inside. So thank you very much for this. Hope to see all of you at the next plenary session with General Mahoney, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, at lunch. Please, a round of applause for our panelists here today. Thank you all again.
Very well done.
And thank you for your insightful questions.
Thanks, sir. Thanks a lot.
Bravo, Zoom. Good job.
Hey, Matt. Well done.
General, good to see you.